governance. What is a Muslim country? What is a Muslim organization, a Muslim establishment? Uh, this is an interesting question because when we ended last week, it opened up many doors. Okay. What is a Muslim nation? What is an Islamic establishment? Is the Khilafah the only form of governance that the Muslims can aspire to? Do we have to wait for a Khilafah to arrive before we can begin to enact what an Islamic society needs to thrive and to flourish? So I'm going to present to you, as I said, it won't be exhaustive because Muqaddim is very, very, very rich and dense. However, I've taken certain elements that I believe will be very good for us to begin with, and also analysis from when the last Khilafah was abolished in 1924. We had great thinkers at the time who were grappling with this idea because it was the first time in history where we as an ummah globally did not have a single Khilafah running. Now, in the past, we had periods when a Khilafah fell and there was another Khilafah somewhere else. So there was always a shift in the locus of power. But in 1924 was the first time in the entire history of Islam when the entire Muslim world, all at once, did not have a single Khilafah anywhere. And so the ideologues and thinkers, the Uqala of that time, began to think and question and ponder and analyze and theorize. And they came to various interesting conclusions. But most importantly, they came back to Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah. They went back to the Muqaddimah because he has some really interesting, groundbreaking ideas in that book. And they began to review it. Now, to some people, I won't say many, I will assume that most people are well read and well educated in the history of Islam in contemporary times. So I say to some people, they may not be aware that the founding fathers of nations such as Pakistan, for example, which we boast of as a Muslim ummah, having been the very first Islamic republic in the history of mankind. But the founders had a specific view concerning the end of the Khilafah in 24 and the establishment of the Turkish Republic. A certain take that many of us who may not have read about that part of history may find very strange and startling. So I've got the quotes here, I've got the books for you to read up for yourself, inshallah. Very interesting. Uh, I believe, this is my personal belief, again, I am nobody. I'm a nobody, so don't take my statements and opinions as it's just an opinion. We all have one. But I believe our generation, the last 100 years, we have a civilizational duty and a mission. And that is to figure out one of the most complicated problems that has struck the Muslims. And that is we don't have a head. We are a body without a head. If you recall the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the ummah is one body. The ummah is one body. So he personifies the ummah as one body. And if one part of that body is in pain, the head or the rest of the body feel that and they're awake all night. That body was beheaded in 1924. That body, with all its members, was beheaded in 1924. And so we have really the unsurmountable task of reviving that body. So we have a huge responsibility. And if you can't revive the body, we find an alternative to that body. So although we find ourselves in a position where it's very peculiar, we live all over the world. Many of us have left the Muslim world altogether, and we have entered the Western world, and we settled in the Western world. Our modes of education has changed. How we perceive religion has changed. How we conduct ourselves has changed. Our worldview has changed, and the world in general has changed. So we live in very unique times, and I think oftentimes we don't give ourselves the grace that we deserve. We don't give ourselves the break and the rahmah we deserve. We as a generation are going through something nobody went through before. And so we have unique challenges, but also unique opportunities. We have unique opportunities to contribute, to revive, to educate. I sent a snippet of Mahmoud Shaltut, Sheikh Al-Azhar Mahmoud Shaltut, who was the Sheikh of Al-Azhar during the reign of Nasir, Gamal Abdel Nasir. And he wrote a book on modernism in Islam. And in that book, you saw he was grappling with the ideas that were coming to that part of the world, most notably socialism, and how to synthesize socialism with an Islamic system. And so we've gone through various elements of experimentation with nationalism, an illness that many of us cannot even, to this point, cannot even recover from. We're still suffering from that. Liberalism, Arabism, socialism, capitalism, and now democracy. So we've experimented with various types of ideas, and nothing seems to be working. But Shaltut says that any form or any attempt to revive a society, to renovate, to rejuvenate a society, to restore a society, begins with education. He says it begins with educating the individual person to themselves be a better person, to be better educated. So it begins with that. We can't do anything as an ummah with ignorant people. Nothing can be done. You can't do a jihad with ignorant people. You can't revive the cultural and the spiritual and the intellectual tradition of Islam with ignorant people. So it begins with education. And so, if we're going to talk about the Muslim world at large, and everyone has an opinion online about the Ummah, the Ummah, the Ummah, what's wrong with the Ummah? The easiest way is to blame the leaders, but you always have to look in the mirror. What are we doing as contributors to this Ummah? And so, the beginning phase is education. Somebody posted following the last two sessions, this is the Adab book club, but you only talk about geopolitics. Well, it's not maybe a surprise for some of us, but geopolitics and Adab go hand in hand. There's a famous statement, readers are leaders. Readers are leaders, right? Or leaders are readers, because in order for you to be at the forefront of anything, you need to be somebody who's educated in that thing to begin with. So the very statement of adab is not just stories and poems, it's also about how to read the world, how to navigate the problems of the world, how to understand the problems so you can bring solutions. So all of this comes under adab. The Muqaddimah itself is one of the greatest works of adab. But if you look at the book, it has politics, economics, sociology, religion, spirituality, even nutrition. So adab is to look at the world and to understand it for what it is, but also with education inside. So I'm going to share with you a presentation today, briefly. I don't want to talk too much, quite frankly. I would rather hear from you. I'm here for you, so I want to hear from you. But as I present the presentation, I want us to pick up on certain elements and statements so we can discuss it as a group, inshallah. Again, I'm not here to hear myself. I want to hear what you have to say. So let's begin by sharing the slide, a very brief slide, inshallah. And this slide is very interesting, actually. It's very, very thought-provoking, but it's also tied into the Muqaddimah. Before I begin, just a quick question. Who here believes that the optimal solution for what we're seeing in Gaza and all over the Muslim world today, the optimal solution is to establish a khilafah? Who believes that? Who believes that we will never be able to do anything positive or restore anything in this ummah unless we have a khilafah? That's our solution. That's the solution effectively. So we've got one person. Anybody else believe that's the solution?
I think definitely.
Definitely. Bismillah. Be open. I'm not taking any sides. I want to hear from you genuinely.
Yeah, we definitely need a Khilafah.
Right. Okay, so on the other end of the spectrum, who believes it's just a band-aid? We don't really need a khilafah. What we need to do is maybe establish something else.
I think, brother Ibrahim, Ustad Ibrahim, maybe the question should be asked like this. So if we just assume that the caliphate is not an option, did the nation-state model, which is like implemented for more than 100 years, was successful in solving these kind of problems? And as we know, the issue with Palestine is going for more than 100 years. Maybe the question could have been asked like this as well.
You can ask it however you like, but I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. Yeah, you can add the layers to it. Because some of us have the opinion that the only solution that will ever work in alleviating the problems and fixing everything is we have to have a khilafah. That's the only solution. Anything less than that is not going to work for us. Can you see the presentation slide, or can you just see my...
Yes.
Yeah? Can you see the presentation slide? Brilliant. What can you see? Does it say Caliphate and Kingdoms?
Yes, brother.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay. Don't want to put you through the ordeal of looking at me for another 10, 15 minutes. All right, so here we have chapter 3, dynasties. Let me make sure I've got the right screen. Trying to work with two screens here. Settings. Just try and display the settings here. Apologies, guys. I'm really bad at this issue every week. Can somebody give me an audio? What can you see right now? Can you see the full screen, or can you see like
We can see the full screen, Ustad.
everything is white, yeah?
Now it's like historian, this wallpaper.
Okay, no problem. That's not
I think you have to choose the presentation mode. You were just
I have,
click.
yeah, I need to switch because I've got two you know,
I see.
let's keep it simple. Let's remove this one. Take it back to the olden days. So there we are. In the meantime, does anybody disagree with the idea that the Khilafah fixes everything? Does anyone disagree that the Khilafah fixes everything?
I want to say, even when there was a Khilafah, there were still many crusaders who occupied Palestine and different coastal territories around the Muslim world, even during the Khilafah times. And it didn't need a united Khilafah at that time to recapture those territories. There were many crusades in so many different areas throughout the Muslim world, not just the crusade that we all know about. And it didn't take a Khilafah at those times to kick those people out.
That's a very good point. In fact, the Abbasid Khalifa.
Yeah, like if you know the
Bismillah.
Yeah, like for example, there was the big crusade against Morocco in the 16th century. I think it was Sultan Ahmed al-Mansur. He kicked out the Portuguese in the Battle of Wadi Makhzen. It was just Morocco on its own doing that. They kicked the Portuguese out of their coastal towns. There was many. I think there was much more than that. That's just one example.
And I mean, the first crusades, the Abbasids did not even they didn't get involved. Muslims came to seek help, and the Khalifa was so distant, it was so far away, physically but also economically, that he didn't get involved. Yeah, they went to him to seek assistance, and he didn't get involved. All right, so let's look at the first section. We'll come back to it, inshallah. Chapter 3, Dynasties, Royal Authority. If you have this version of the translation, if you can see my presentation, my screen, the Princeton edition, from page 166, you'll find the following extracts, okay? So Ibn Khaldun says, it has thus been shown how the form of government came to be royal authority. So what he means by this is that in his day and age, in the 14th century, what was working for that world was not a khilafah, it was kingdoms. That was what was working in that day and age. And he was working for various dynasties at the time who were kings and had kingdoms. And so he's now going to tell us how we got to where we began with the Khilafah al-Rashida and we end up with kingdoms. So he says, following a long discourse, it has thus been shown how the form of government came to be royal authority. However, there remained the traits that are characteristic of the Khilafah, namely preference for Islam and its way, and adherence to the path of truth. A change became apparent only in the restraining influence that had been Islam, and now came to be group feeling and the sword. So this is quite loaded. But what he's saying is that what used to be the Khilafah, a system of Islam, becomes the kingdom. However, even though we now have kingdoms and kings, it still has a hint of Islam, okay? It is still restricted by Islamic guidelines. It isn't completely un-Islamic, it isn't completely secular. It is a kingdom, but it has Islam, it implements Islam, okay? And so it has the restraining influence of Islam. So they don't get to do whatever they like. they still apply Islamic laws and Islamic rules. And this applies to most kingdoms in the Muslim world today. They're not Khilafah, but they are kingdoms, and these kingdoms have Islamic rulings. So we cannot dismiss them just because they don't have a Khalifa ruling. We can't say it's not an Islamic country because it's not Khalifa. They have kings. Kingdom is haram. This is a very common misconception. Kingship is haram. Ibn Khaldun challenges and refutes that idea. That was the situation in the time of Muawiyah, Marwan, and his son Abdul Malik. Okay, so these were the three, you could say, patriarchs of the Umayyad kingdom: Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan the first, Marwan ibn al-Hakam, and Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, and then his four sons. So at that time, they had kingdoms, but there was Islam being implemented. So it's like a hybrid khilafah, effectively. And that was also the case of the first khulafa of the Abbasid epoch. Okay, so Ibn Khaldun is saying, yeah, there were kingdoms, we acknowledge that, but it was still Islamic establishment. They still fulfilled the maqasid of the Sharia, and they were still Islamic. And so it's like a hybrid model, but it was still functional. It still worked. Okay. So then he says, so following that period, the characteristic traits of the Khilafah disappeared, and only the name remained. So the real form and content of a Khilafah was erased, and the only thing left was a name. So this is talking about the latter Khulafa of the Abbasid Empire, who were only Khulafa by name. But in actuality, they had no way of ruling as Khulafa. So the form of government came to be royal authority, pure and simple. So at that moment, they were just kingdoms. Even though there was a leader called Khalifa, in reality, it was just a kingdom, hereditary rule. Pure and simple, he says. So this was the case, for instance, with the non-Arab rulers in the East. So now we're talking about Ibn Khaldun dies in the early phase of the Turkic rule. So for example, the Seljuk and the Ottoman in the early phase. He doesn't get to see the development of the Ottoman Empire. But when he was alive, they were already around the area. They were present and they were gathering influence. So he mentions of those non-Arab rulers in the East, and the greatest amongst them being the Ottomans that come after him and thrive and grow after him. They showed obedience to the Khalifa in order to enjoy the blessing involved in that. So what would happen when the Abbasid Khilafah was only effectively an empty shell of itself? The Khalifa himself didn't have any power. He was only a Khalifa in name. There were various different governors and imarats and sultanas and different groups of people who ruled themselves. But in order to be legitimate, they gave bay'ah to the Khalif in Baghdad. And they did so only so that they can legitimate their rule wherever they were. And we found that was the case, for example, in Seljuks, with also the Al-Murabitun. So these people who were ruling different parts of the Muslim empire and doing it better than the Khalifa could ever do it in Baghdad, they did not call themselves Khulafa. They called themselves Sultan, Amir, Malik, whatever the title was, but not Khalifa. And the Khalifa gave them titles as well. Ruknuddin, for example, okay? Nasiruddin, these sorts of titles. So they were happy with that arrangement, where he was in the middle as a figurehead, but not ruling according to Sharia as a Khalifa. But they also were ruling locally as kings, as sultans. Today you could say presidents, prime ministers. So the essence of rulership was there, but the absolute form was already gone. So Ibn Khaldun doesn't condemn that, but he does admit the royal authority belonged to them with all its titles and attributes. They were fully kings, fully sultans, fully imams, and the Khalif had no share in it. In other words, he had no power. He had no power. It is thus clear that the Khilafah at first existed without royal authority. So the first epoch of Khulafa, al-Rashidun, for example, nothing of that rule resembles kingdoms or emirates or sultanates. It was a pure Khilafah in every sense of the word. So initially it began that way with purity of purpose and form. Later on, the characteristics began to be mixed up. So, for example, the Umayyads and the Abbasids, they called themselves Khulafa. They ruled vast amounts of land, but they were inheriting the title of Khalifa, which goes against the principle of being a Khalifa, which should be left to the Ummah. So now is a mixture of a kingdom, hereditary kingdom, but also a Khilafah. But eventually, finally, it became purely just a kingdom that established Islam. So where we are today, in 2024, we have this final form of rulership in the Muslim world, where kingdoms exist. They are pure kings. There's no question about it. They inherit the rule, father to son to father, right? So this is a pure kingdom. Their title is Malik, king. There's no way of confusing it with the Khilafah. However, at the same time, they establish Islam. And to establish Islam, you don't have to create Jannah on earth. You secure that the Muslims can practice their deen openly and freely. You ensure that the pillars of Islam are visible and practicable. So, for example, to make the adhan openly, to pray the Eid prayer publicly, to make the Hajj, to celebrate Ramadan and Eid. Women can wear hijab. The signs of Allah are honored and not blasphemed. So these are the things that, in order to call your society Islamic society, you fulfill that. Even if you call yourself a king, or in today's speech, a president or prime minister. Okay, that's what we're left with. So Ibn Khaldun mentions this to explain to you that if you have the phantasm that a khilafah throughout time and space remains pure, concentrated, undiluted, it's always going to be the same form, he's letting you know right now that is not the reality. That was the case early on in Islamic history. But later on, everything changed, and we have a diluted form. The only thing left of it is the name. The only thing left is the name, but the reality is, as I said, pure and simple, these were kingdoms, but they were still effective. So here is a piece of literature. It's an article, a research article, very interesting, which seeks to compare Ibn Khaldun's idea of Khilafah and also modern thinkers, Iqbal, for example, Rashid Rida, for example, what they think about the idea of living in a world of no Khilafah. And they were divided. Some of these thinkers lamented the fact that we have no more Khilafah, even though, to be honest, the Ottoman Khilafah in the latter part wasn't a Khilafah in the sense we understand it. The romanticism we have for it, it wasn't that anymore. It was a kingdom. It became a kingdom, right? But the title Khalifa remained, maybe for sentimental reasons, but it was no longer a Khilafah in the sense of the purity we seek. It wasn't that. It became a kingdom. And that kingdom eventually became a republic. So some of the ideologues, the thinkers of that time, were happy that the mosque was removed. Some were happy that finally we got rid of this establishment. Others lamented it and want to re-establish it. Amongst these people was Iqbal, Allama Iqbal. Allama Iqbal, sorry, my brain is a bit slow today. Yeah, Iqbal, the very famous thinker, ideologue, and spiritual founder, ideological founder of Pakistan. So he had mixed feelings. He looked at Turkey and what Turkey had become, and he wasn't altogether sad that the Khilafah was removed. In fact, in many ways, he believes it was a necessary step to uniting the Muslim world. It was a barrier for unification of the Muslim nations. Yeah. So when Turkey was established, Pakistan also follows in that model. Although it was established on the principle of Islam, it wasn't establishing another Khilafah. They didn't establish another Khilafah. Yeah. Why didn't they ask for a Khilafah to be established in Pakistan, in India? What was stopping them from saying we want to establish a Khilafah for the Muslims, or a Sultanate, or an Emirate? They went for a republic. Think about that for a bit. Yeah. So we're going to read a bit of what he had to say. It's a really interesting article. The link will be available for you to do your own reading, inshallah. So Ibn Khaldun, by the way, was in between two extremes. He acknowledged that we don't have a khilafah the way Muslims think of it. Righteous rulers, a perfect Islamic system, waging jihad, taking jizya, establishing deen, defending the borders, unity amongst the ummah. That never existed beyond maybe the first 2 or 3 centuries. So Ibn Khaldun knows that is a distant dream, will not be attained. But at the same time, he censures against those at the time who were saying we don't need a khilafah at all. That's another extreme. And he says there are 2 types of people who dismiss the khilafah altogether. The first type is a khariji. The khariji rejects khilafah altogether. That's the first category, he says. The second type is a mu'tazili, the rationalist. He also rejects the khilafah altogether. So these 2 categories, Ibn Khaldun says, after establishing the khilafah as a necessity, he goes for the evidences, Quran, ijma', sunnah. He gives you, I don't have time to go into all of it, but he gives you the evidences. And he says, by necessity, you need to have a khalifa. Khalifa being a term for a leader. However, you will not get the purity that you seek because we've gone past that stage already. It's going to be tainted, diluted, won't be perfect, but it serves a purpose. And the other extreme say we don't need one at all. We can just live righteous lives in righteous societies. We don't need to have a khalifa or an imam or a sultan. He says those people are people who don't want to abide by the rules of a sultan or a king. So they make excuses that we don't need one. Okay? He's in between. He doesn't care for re-establishing a khilafah properly, Ibn Khaldun. He's happy with what he has, but at the same time, he doesn't want to actively destroy it. That's a very, very wonderful balance. He's not going out of his way to re-establish the khilafah as it was, but at the same time, he's not going to help those who want to destroy the idea of a khilafah being established. He's in between because he says he finds a lot of value in maintaining the ideal and the concept of khilafah. There's a value for it. So although we may not attain everything that we want to attain, we should not abandon everything. Yeah, he's in between. And that's a very, very interesting balance that he's striking here. Some of us today will say, unless we have a khilafah, and by this I mean ala minhaj al-nabuwa, proper khilafah, nothing will be fixed. We won't be able to do anything in the Muslim world. And there are others who say, we don't need a khilafah. We don't even need a system. We just need to be good Muslims in society, do nice things, pray, give zakah, and that's enough. We don't need to have a khilafah, a system. Islam is not politics. These are 2 extremes. You need to be in between. You may not be working actively to establish khilafah, that's okay. But at the same time, don't discourage the idea that a khilafah should be established. In between. Yeah.
Oh, can I say something, Ustad? Once,
of course you can. Bismillah, jump in.
Yeah. First, I think a lot of this khilafah need, I think a lot of it is influenced by the eschatology as well and the times that we're living in. So I think eschatology kind of influences a lot of the thoughts, like nothing's going to happen until the Khalifa comes, the Mahdi, and all of that. And the second thing, Ibn Khaldun talks about in that same paragraph or that same chapter about some ethical decisions that the first Khalifs did, but it would have been better if they took a more pragmatic decision. Like,
Yeah.
can you explain that?
So the Khulafa of latter days or the Khulafa the early? Clearly it can't be the early days.
He talks about in the book, I can't remember exactly, but he talks about one of the first 4 Khalifs that they took the decision based on ethics and righteousness, but it wasn't the best decision.
This is the realpolitik discussion. Let's save that for another day. That's the real. That is a very, very, that's exactly. That's the Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan. Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan had a problem in that he was very lenient, very kind, very accommodating. And to be an effective ruler, sometimes you have to be a bit harsh. Yeah, you need to be less considerate to achieve, as I say, if you want to make eggs, you need to crack a few shells. Yeah? You can't be always nice and considerate and the righteous guy who's always going to just turn the other cheek. Sometimes you make examples of people so you can teach the society at large how to behave. Sometimes you strike before being struck, so you teach the enemy not to mess with you. Sometimes you have to do certain things that would normally not be considered nice, but for the greater good, it will save you. Yeah. In the same way, Khidr, he destroyed the boat. Visually, from the surface level, that's a bad thing to do. You destroyed the boat. He destroyed that boat. He put the hole in the boat so that it can be saved from the greater calamity of being taken away altogether. Sometimes a leader may do something, and to us, we may not like it. Individually, may not like it. But that thing that he did may be good for the greater society at large. Okay, it may be a policy that would benefit the greater society. Maybe not even now, but maybe the next generation. So that's the idea that realpolitik, that's a topic that we should discuss another time. It's so deep and profound. But don't judge rulers by your standards. Because what makes a good citizen, what makes a good citizen doesn't always make a good leader. And what makes a good leader doesn't always make a good citizen. Yeah. The standards are very different. That's not to say that we never judge or we never criticize or we never seek accountability, but don't expect the rulers to behave the way we behave. Yeah. And sometimes if they do that, they end up losing. They're not going to be as effective as leaders as it should be. I can't see all your hands, but please just speak. You don't have to.
Yes,
Yeah, you speak.
brother. I just wanted to address the point Brother Sufyan was bringing forward regarding eschatology and people expecting everything from Imam Mahdi coming. I think that's a legitimate point if you really assume that people are expecting this kind of caliphate model. But I think there are two separate lines of people who want to bring the caliphate or are expecting something from the caliphate. If you really refer to those who are waiting for Mahdi and doing nothing and are expecting that everything will be solved after Imam Mahdi is coming, yes, I think that's the point you should really doubt about. But if you consider establishing the caliphate upon the prophethood, the method of prophethood, which Ustad Ibrahim was referring to, I think that's a completely different discussion, because no one expecting to be that everything will be solved after the caliphate is established, or it is something, an institution which is coming all of a sudden from heaven or from top down. I think that's a wrong understanding, or that's a common misconception about the idea of caliphate. If you just assume that it will come from out of nowhere, someone is going to establish it somewhere, and all of a sudden all the problems will be solved. I think that's a topic which should be addressed.
And it will be addressed. I think we should address it. It's a very timely discussion because obviously we live in that age, right? We are those people, so we need to understand the reality of what is available to us as options and what is not available to us as an option. If we just wait for the perfect society to just one day appear, the perfect ruler to one day appear. Let's wait for the perfect ruler. Maybe not the Mahdi, but somebody who's going to come and just fix everything. We have to ask ourselves, how is that going to happen if we're not doing anything to prepare for that person? Yeah. So, and sometimes we have to make the best of what we have. It's about being realistic. That's why last session, the question of are there Muslim nations, I said every Muslim country, 51 of those states, for me personally, they are all Muslim nations. Until and unless something very clear makes it clear that it's not a Muslim nation. They are Muslim nation by default. Now you have to prove why they're not Muslim nations. Because the idea we have is that a Muslim nation, when we say things such as, there are no Muslim countries on earth establishing Sharia, or there are no Muslim leaders, real Muslim leaders on earth. What do we mean by that? 51 nations. And you want us to believe that there aren't any of them who actually are Muslim nations or Muslim rulers or Muslim establishments. Yeah. That's because the ideal is so high. Not Syria. Not Syria. Yeah. And it's not extreme. I'm not going to say Syria because Syria, we know who's ruling Syria now. Before the Arab Spring, yes, Syria was a Muslim nation. No question. There were ulama, there were schools, the culture was open. Certainly, even though the ruler himself wasn't the best Muslim, now it's different because we've seen what happened. Now it's very different. But before the revolution, it was certainly an Islamic nation. No question about that. Even with the ruler being the ruler. You know, there were times, for example, Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, he lived in a time when you had many different challenges. The Mongols, and those of them who were ruling at the time, and the Mamluks, and they had to give fatwa, you know. They had to question whether or not if a non-Muslim were to rule over us, to obey him. His famous statements, this is where the statements come out, the context of the statements. A non-Muslim system that is just and establishes justice will be helped by Allah more than a Muslim system that is unjust. Because they're grappling with the idea of are these guys even Muslim? That was the question. Or are they still judging by the customary rules and books? Are they even Muslims? But at the same time, we need them to be there, or we can't rebel because it's going to cause a greater harm. So now there's a greater need to analyze what is a Muslim nation. Is it based on the ruler? That's what defines a Muslim nation. Or is it based on the people he rules over? If they're majority Muslim, that's a Muslim, even if the rule isn't Muslim. Very interesting debates and discussions. But again, it requires deeper study and contemplation. All right, so towards a Muslim League of Nations. So Iqbal, I'm going to share the reference here. He has written a book, Reconstruction of the Muslim, really interesting book. Because at that time, again, like Mahmoud Shaltut, Iqbal, Rashid al-Rida, many thinkers were thinking and busy writing and theorizing for how to reconstruct the Muslim world. Upon what basis? Now that we no longer have a Khilafah. And so Iqbal, in his reconstruction, 1930, so it's in English, so you can read it in English, it's available. For Iqbal, he writes about what he constitutes to be a Muslim League of Nations. So rather than having one Khalifa over all the nations, which he compares to Arab imperialism or Turkish imperialism, why not have independent nations who are Muslim, who come together and help one another? Yeah. And Pakistan leads the way by being the first republic based on Islam. So he criticizes Khilafah, but also looks at Ibn Khaldun to seek balance. So Ibn Khaldun warned against shattering the prevailing Muslim consensus surrounding the preservation of the Khilafah. Ibn Khaldun, as we said before, he wasn't going to actively seek to recreate a perfect Khilafah. He was happy with the kingdoms he lived in, but he was also criticizing those who were saying we don't need a Khilafah. Stay in between. Don't destroy it and don't necessarily go out to build one, but stay in between. So he warned us about doing that, talking against Khilafah. Atatürk then comes about and he destroys the Khilafah altogether. But when he did that, do not be misdirected into thinking all the Muslims in the world were sad about that. There were some Muslims who were actually not sad at all. They may not have celebrated it, but they were not sad. For them, it was about time somebody did this. So when he did that, he wasn't condemned by all Muslim thinkers. But it did provoke a widespread consternation across the Islamic world. So now what? Now what do we do? So for example, in India, we all know the Khilafat movement, which was very much endorsed by leading figures in India, including Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was a huge supporter of the Khilafat movement in India. So that was a very famous movement that sought to revive or to preserve and then somehow salvage whatever was left of the Khilafah. We know their story, but not everybody in India shared the sentiments. So for example, their enthusiasm did not rub off on one of India's most famous philosophers and poets, Allama Iqbal. So Allama Iqbal, he wasn't looking to recreate the Khilafah. And he would attempt to bury the old imperial Khilafah once and for all. At the same time, Iqbal warmly praises Ibn Khaldun, because Ibn Khaldun had a balance. Okay? I'm not going to destroy the Khilafah. I'm not going to revive the Khilafah either. I'm in between. So we need to understand what he says concerning the Khilafah. So this is the book for those who want to read The Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, Allama Iqbal. And on page 125, 126, we're going to read the following. So first of all, if I just remove this, I can hardly see. So here, let me just get out. So writing around the 1930s, apologies, my screen has stopped sharing once again. So he was writing in the 1930s, and can we see the screen, guys? We can see the screen, can we? Yes, thank you. Barakallahu fikum. So writing around 19, so basically not even 10 years have gone by, 24 to 30, and he had been emboldened by Atatürk's action. He had been emboldened. For those of you who don't like what I'm saying, the book is there. Allama Iqbal himself, okay? So read his own book in English. So he was emboldened, inspired by what Atatürk had done in Turkey. That is the removal of the Khilafah to replace it with a republic. It's not a coincidence that in 1947 there's an Islamic republic. I repeat, an Islamic republic. It wasn't Islamic Khilafah or an Islamic imamate or an Islamic sultanate or an Islamic sheikhdom. It was an Islamic republic. So he comes to identify the Khilafah not merely with Arabian imperialism, but with the empire of Islam as such. So this empire could be Arab, as it was in the early state of Islam, of course, or Turkish, as it was in the latter state. The unfortunate thread that runs through Islamic history from the Umayyad period onwards is imperialism. So the Khilafah, as it became, according to Iqbal, was imperialism. And this, by the way, ties two loose ends. The Arabs in the Hijaz who stood up and rebelled against the Ottoman Khalifa or Khilafah, they called for independence from this imperialist system, talking about the Ottomans. Here we have from the Indian subcontinent, Allama Iqbal comparing the Khilafah of the Ottomans as imperialist. It's quite interesting because oftentimes when we talk about imperialism, we think of the West only, Britain, France, Italy, and the rest of them. But there was a sentiment amongst Muslims in the Muslim world at that time, when they heard of imperialism, they didn't think France, Britain, and Italy, they thought the Ottoman Empire. And Iqbal, he didn't repel that idea. He was on board with that idea. So it had hijacked the original sense of Khilafah, which was egalitarian, ukhuwa. So it had been hijacked. While the rulers may have deceived the Muslim masses into regarding the Khilafah as a symbol of Islamic unity. So effectively, it was a hoax. It is better understood as a symbol legitimizing the despotic power. Now, these statements could be taken straight from the book of the Arab nationalists of that time, all right, who really hated the Ottomans and considered them usurpers and fake khulafa and colonizers and imperialists. Iqbal is telling us, actually, yeah, they were using Islam and the Khilafah as a fake symbol of unity to cover their despotic, illegitimate power. So he then goes on to say, the elimination of the Khilafah represents not the separation of church and state, but rather the liberation of Islam from imperial despotism. So the Khilafah for him wasn't the end of Islam. We're not separating Islam from rulership. Rather, we're liberating the Muslims from an imperial project. It's a different perspective. And that perspective, I don't agree with it, but I appreciate the sentiment. It was the same statement that the Sharif in Mecca was proclaiming to his people. And the same statement that the Al Saud at that time, prior to that, were challenging and putting forward. Right? So they wanted to liberate themselves from this imperial colonizing force that was covering itself under the cloak of Khilafah, but was oppressing people. Now, I don't agree with all of that, but it is a sentiment that we have to come to know about. So he then goes on to say, and the statement says, Atatürk, knowingly or not, so whether he knew what he was doing or not, he helped restore the authentic spirit of Islam, subhanAllah. And this is page 125, 126, Iqbal, yeah? The reconstruction of religious thought in Islam. These are the words of Iqbal, not my words. Yeah? So that's quite a bit. The decision to abolish the Khilafah is necessary, but not sufficient for this purpose. Okay, so he goes on and on. Then we have another statement, which is quite interesting, because for him, the solution was some sort of league of nations. So you have all these Muslim nations, and then they have a league that come together. And that was a solution to the problem. So Islam is neither nationalism nor imperialism, but a league of nations. So it's neither a state of nationalism. So we don't want an ummah divided by flags and borders, and nobody talks to one another, and we're all doing it. No, we don't want that. But we don't want to have imperialism. So in the way the Ottomans ruled, where they had control of a vast expanse of land, but were despotic and oppressive in certain areas, we don't want that either. Rather, we want to have nations that are independent, come together, and work together. Okay?
I'm so obsessed with Devin.
Sorry,
And
somebody.
but that's why. Correct if you can. See, I learned my lesson. So little fight, so you know where I'm going. We went back with Canelo Triple G.
لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. بارك الله فيكم. I've stopped. My train of thought's gone. Before I continue, has anybody got anything to say so far? Do you agree? Do you disagree? How do you feel about these statements from this quite interesting idea from Iqbal?
I totally disagree with it
Bismillah, come on.
because jihad can be
That
both
was passionate.
offensive and defensive.
Aywa.
Jihad can be both offensive and defensive. So there's no problem in doing jihad and expanding the realm of the Islamic State. There's no problem with this.
But what if you were doing jihad against Muslims? Like
I don't agree with this at all. Like we saw like recently in Syria what happened. You had Daesh claiming a Khilafah and they decided to attack every other Muslim around them, make the career on them. Obviously, that's a bit different because they were Khawarij, calling everyone else Murtadeen. But also, this is just how it is in Islamic history, like kingdoms fighting kingdoms, like the Mamluks and the Ottomans, or the Abbasids and the Umayyads. This is just how it is in Islamic history. The problem is when you resort to takfir and other Muslims, calling them apostates. I think that is like the red line. But generally speaking, kingdoms fighting each other, this is just a fact of history.
But what do you think about Allah Iqbal said that Atatürk, whether he meant it or not, whether he understood what he did or not, he liberated the Muslim nations from the imperialism of the Ottomans?
I think it was BS.
I totally disagree with it.
It's a statement.
Because in abolishing the caliphate was even worse, because now we have like radical groups that are filling the void because there is no caliphate. So they can claim legitimacy due to the fact there is no caliphate, due to the fact there is no central ruler.
I agree perfectly. First of all, to be very clear, I disagree that the Ottomans, we were better off without them. I disagree. I think we're better with them. Even though they were weak, I've said it many times.
Yeah.
We were far better off with a weak, one unified leadership, even if it was just a shell of a leadership, than what we have today. The idea that we can have this League of Nations, as Iqbal put it, we have it now, don't we? The Muslim World League. What use does it have for us? Are not the greatest wars, civil wars in the last 100 years, many of them in our nations, between the Muslim nations. So has it really helped us to have these leagues, I don't think it has. Pakistan itself, by 1970, 71, what happened in Pakistan? East and West. Massive civil war. So that was clearly not a solution, right? But he was writing at a time when this was still an idea, and he was proposing that rather than having one imperialist, and by the way, the idea that the Ottomans are imperialists, who disagrees with that idea?
Sorry, can I ask a question?
You can. When we say imperialism,
so is it practical for Muslims to have one unified caliphate in today's world, considering the diversity of cultures, political system, and national identities among Muslims globally?
What do you think? What's your take on that personally?
I think it's not ideal because we have internal differences among the Muslims, like
sectarianism,
That's a big one.
differing interpretations of Islam, and global political resistance.
So are
But brother, didn't we have these kind of things you put forward in the history of Islam as well? Was it a major like barrier for unification in this or that regard? So I think this is nothing new. You mentioned these kind of like differences. They have been present throughout the history of Islamic Ummah as well. So I don't see that as a major obstacle, even though they are present, and I think they should be like fixed in some manner. But I think you don't need a unification on every single creedal issue or even in branch issues or in some views in like spiritual acts and so on. I think that's also a misconception that we need to put our differences aside and need to be unified under one unity regarding all the topics in Islam. I don't think so. You need to have this kind of unification or uniformation, to be honest.
So if I could say something, so this whole thing of like, you know, like Allama Iqbal, he brought forth that idea of like the League of Muslim Nations, and we've already seen that it's not something that has practically worked out. But I keep going through this thought exercise of how do you make a unified body with nation states? Because like when you even look through like the past, even like in Salah ad-Din's time, there was a period of consolidation of power during a time of division. And like, how do you do this bloodlessly and whatnot? And I think there are somewhat of like modern examples of how this happens. Because even like with the like Pax Americana, right? Like it's not like we don't look at America as, or like other countries that are under its influence as like, you know, like this is USA and this is whatnot. And I think we are starting to see like consolidation of powers, even like in the Muslim world, particularly with the GCC, who have economic leverage over other countries. You know, for example, like UAE has been purchasing land from Egypt, and a part of that is in helping Egypt to fulfill its debts to the IMF. So I think this is kind of our like there's a process where we have to modernize our way of how like political empires work, for us to recognize where does the consolidation of power like happening, especially with the Muslim world. And I think there is benefit in that because it's done bloodlessly. Whereas in the past, you'd have to have nations like the Ottoman Empire or even like the Sauds like invading different Muslim tribes for the purpose of that consolidation.
Absolutely, yeah. The unification theory of you have to it's blood, isn't it? You have to subjugate somebody else in order to actually be able to unify the territory and the land.
How would you do that with all the nations that are already existing?
That's a question, yeah. And also, this is a very good question because it's a temporary question. It's a temporal question that often comes up again and again. How do you define who you should unite with and on what ground?
On Aqidah ground, I think.
How deep? How deep?
I think the only ground that will work is La ilaha illallah. Apart from that, there's nothing common.
If we go back to the ground, how many countries could unite?
I fully disagree with.
In the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, you had a lot of people that did their own thing. So they didn't want to pay zakah. Some people, they didn't want to pray Isha or something. So he waged war with them because that was the correct aqidah what they established.
They did pray. They didn't want to give zakah.
They didn't
want
to.
Yeah. They said we're going to pray, we're going to fast, we're going to live, but we don't want to give zakah. But how did he fix that problem?
He waged war with people that are
the Ridda wars.
Yeah. So can we repeat that again today? If we want to have a united nation of Muslims or maybe a unification,
that would not be practical.
Yeah, we need to do the same thing then. Is that feasible?
It's unrealistic in this time. Yeah, in this time that we live, I think.
To be honest with you, if you look at
I feel that the best way to do it is through economic economic ties, you know, like how the European Union countries do it. They maintain their unity, or they start building it through the economic ties, and once those economic bonds are formed, then I think that naturally creates that unity between different regions or countries.
I'm going to challenge you on that.
Yeah.
I'm going to say to you that is inherently a Western model.
Yeah.
The idea that unification is based on economic principle. How did we get to communism and capitalism ruling the world on that basis? And by the way, in the 1940s, the Arab world tried to do that based on Arabism, Uruba. That's when Ba'athism came about. And the problem was, when they began that project, they were on equal footing, pretty much. But within a decade of that project going off, some of those nations became wealthy with oil. What do you think that did for them? When half of them,
it made them competitors, right?
No, they didn't want to share them.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's say we come in economic terms. Somebody comes with a lot of wealth, oil wealth. Another one comes impoverished. Look at all the Muslim worlds on. Let's just say Yemen and Saudi, who are neighbors. Can they unite in economic terms, realistically speaking?
Till date, Yemen is not even part of GCC.
Thank you, but
no,
economy will divide rather than them, because if I'm a millionaire, why would I share my bank account with you if you are barely surviving? You gain everything, I lose everything.
Yeah. But that's the rule of Khilafah, or not? To give sadaqah to the nations that needed it, the regions. So if Yemen is very poor, you collect the money and give it to the region that's not that wealthy.
But it creates an imbalance, For example, we have many case studies because this has been tried. It's not just they've tried it. When Syria and Egypt came together in 56, 53, 56, right? Why did that split happen? Why did they end up just splitting apart? Because Egypt had an economic and political advantage over Syria. And the economic situation in Syria became weaker because Egypt took power. And Nasser wanted to have the upper hand in everything, economically speaking as well. And so they had to move. We're not going to be a part of a relationship where you have all the money or all the economic strength and we have a lesser. We can't remain single, so they divided. Yeah. If you look at the Muslim nations today, some are very wealthy and others are very poor. You're not going to have parity and unity based on that. There's too much difference for them to be united. Rather, it's going to cause division and conflict. It's going to cause division and conflict. It can't be economically based, because if that's the case, unless you have a group of elite nations who are very wealthy and they go off and do their own thing, but the majority of those nations right now are in the lower quartile of poverty standards. So what happens to those nations? Where do they go? Are they not part of the Ummah? Yeah. So I think this is something that is gaining popularity right now, but it's very limited in scope, really. It's very limited in scope.
Yeah, I think it's something maybe could be explored, like maybe looked at as one, as a tool in a huge toolbox with, as a tool that you could use among other tools, because if you look at the Muslim nations, they do trade with Western countries a lot, and that's their main source of income, and then it makes them kind of susceptible to their influence as well. So, if Muslim countries do trade with each other a lot more, and maybe give them a bit of another Muslim nation priority when it comes to trade, from that viewpoint.
Brother Salim,
I think
that will never
I think if my memory serves me correct, I think a decade ago, the GCC tried to do that, a common currency, but then they fell apart because Saudi, before MBS came on the scene, wanted the central bank of the Arab region to be in Riyadh, but the UAE, they wanted in Abu Dhabi, and then the idea fell apart.
Yeah. And by the way, in the Iraq-Iran war, Saddam One of the reasons why he went to invade Kuwait later on is because of that. They had agreed after the war was over, they had agreed that they need to help Iraq rebuild the economy because they've gone through 8 years of war and it damaged the economy of Iraq. So the Arab nations who he was actually, Saddam was fighting on their behalf.
Yeah.
He was fighting on their behalf. So because he took the lion's share of the fighting and he suffered the most, he came and said, listen, the guys in the OPEC organization, you need to help me in Iraq. Allow me to make more money with the oil trading by reducing your quotas. Enable me to have a fair share at making money with my oil because I've gone through 8 years helping you guys. Do you think that worked? No, it didn't work. The next door neighbor, Kuwait, began to steal the oil and flood the market and undermine Iraq's oil production and sales. So on the economic scale, the history tells us it's not going to work. At least not based on what we've been doing in the last 50 years. It's just not strong enough. Recently, we've seen economic scandals in the Muslim community. It's very difficult. If you only base it on an economic principle to maintain unity, it's very difficult. Yeah. Something better than that has to be implemented. As I agree with what you said, it can be a very key proponent of it, and maybe a component of it, certainly, but it cannot be just based on money, because if we do that, most of our wars between nations in Muslim lands because of resources. So based on that alone.
Yeah. Okay.
Salim?
Yeah.
Do you
Thank
want
you.
to
Thank you.
mention? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Brother Awais has his hand up. Brother Awais.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Apologies first of all. I have sort of joined the session late. Had something unexpected coming up. So what I'm about to say may have been discussed already. So I do apologize in advance if I am sort of repeating what's been covered already, because I wasn't here previously. But just to add to some of the comments that brothers have been making in terms of unity, and I completely concur with the host in the sense that just basing something on economics, having that as a foundation for unity, I think will never work. And I think, we see that in Europe as well. Even though they have the EU, the nations within Europe, France, Germany, even though on the face of it they may seem united, but we know deep down, these European nations, they do have differences and they compete with one another, and that's due to capitalism, which these states are. They're capitalist states. So I think taking economics as a basis for unity, I completely concur with Ustad Ibrahim. I think that would never work. Rather, in terms of the Muslim world, I think we need to look at something bigger that would unify us. And I know, and again, just to concur with some of the points that were said earlier, yes, there are differences between Muslims, and these differences between Muslims, they've been there for centuries. And I think one thing we need to accept is that these differences will always be there, and I don't think we will be in a position whereby we can reconcile some of these differences. And I think the key thing is, as long as Muslims believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and one hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes to mind, is that I'm just going to paraphrase the hadith, which is which goes that those who eat halal meat and pray towards the Kaaba, they're Muslims.
Allahu Akbar.
Sorry?
Allahu Akbar.
Yep. So basically, those who do that, they're Muslims. Now, so for example, myself, I'm of the Sunni background, but if there's a Shia brother, for example, who I'm speaking with, yes, I may have differences with him, but if he believes in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, he's my brother in faith. Yes, I may have differences with him, but he's my brother in faith, he is. And I think that's the mindset we Muslims need to have today. And one example that comes to mind of unity between Muslims is that even the Fatimids, they were against Salahuddin, i.e. the Ayyubids, they went to war. But eventually the Fatimids, the Shia of Egypt, did unite with Salahuddin because they had a common cause, which was to liberate Palestine, which was to liberate Masjid al-Aqsa. And the Shia united with Salahuddin to liberate al-Aqsa and to kick out the Crusaders. And if we fast forward to today's day and age, I think we Muslims, this day and age, we need to have a similar mindset in the sense that Muslims have common causes, they have common issues. all Muslims, regardless of their background, want Palestine liberated. And I think as Muslims, we need to think about Islam, and we need to think about what Islam has to say about unifying the Muslims, i.e., unifying the Muslims, under a single-handed state, for example, yeah. And I'll briefly touch upon that point. I'll come back to that point. But I think for me, Islam has to be that basis for unity in today's day and age. And I know some people, they would say, oh, that's unrealistic. You're fantasizing, that will never happen. But if I look at history, the only way Muslims united, and yes, again, I concur with Ustad Ibrahim, there was subjugation. There's no doubt about that. There were some Muslims that came along, subjugated other Muslims for the purpose of unity. But as well as saying that, there were Muslims that willingly unified with other Muslims. And I'll give you one small example. I'm sorry, I'm going on a bit, but I'll cut myself short in about a minute or so. But I was just reading the life of Sultan Abdul Hamid rahmatullah alayh, and basically, when the Ottomans start the Hijaz Railway project, it's Muslims in India who were not even under the jurisdiction of the Ottoman Khilafah. They basically raised money, not only them, but Muslims around the world contributed towards that project. But what I'm trying to say is that those Muslims who went under the jurisdiction of the Ottomani Khilafah, they still supported the Khilafah because they saw it as their Muslim state. They saw it as a state that protected the Muslims and the Holy Lands. And as a result of that, they were loyal towards that state. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are examples in our history where Muslims were loyal towards a Khilafah without subjugation. Yeah, through dawah. And I think when it comes to unity, it's really important to basically, in terms of dawah, it's really important that our dawah also includes those topics that relate to unity and Muslims, being united in a political polity. I think that's really important. And just one final point I just wanted to just briefly touch upon, and again, I do apologize that I've gone on for a bit. Just one final thing. People talk about nation states, what a nation is, etc. I think one important thing to look at is, again, if we look at the Sahaba, and in terms of the Ijma' Sahaba, that's a source of law within Islam as well, which the ulama, which the scholars of history, would refer back to. And one thing that the Sahaba were very clear on when it came to politics, when it came to unity, they were very clear on the fact that there only has to be a single head of state for the Muslims. They didn't allow there to be more than one leader. And yes, there was we're all aware of the famous battle between Ali radiallahu anh and Muawiyah, the battle of Safin. Yeah. The thing is, though, even though that battle took place, Ali radiallahu anh, who was the head of state at the time, did not accept for the Sham region, which was under Muawiyah, to break away from the mainland of the Khilafah, i.e. the Sahaba went to war over unity just to maintain that single polity for Muslims. And I think that emphasizes how important having that united state for the Muslims, it is so important because the Sahaba shed blood over that, and that itself emphasizes how important it is to have a single polity for the Muslims. So I just wanted to say that, but again, I apologize for going on a bit.
No.
Bearing with me.
It's wonderful, wonderful stuff. I appreciate that a lot. And I want to just add a bit from my side. You're perfectly right. We underemphasize the importance of unity. We underemphasize, in fact, to some degree, we emphasize division more than unity. There are more arguments as to why we cannot unite with this jama'ah and that jama'ah than there are for why we should. Think of the last time you heard somebody giving a lecture about the unity between different groups and emphasizing that with ahadith and ayat. And there are many. Allah says in the Quran concerning Jews and Christians, Ta'alaw ila kalimatin sawa'in baynana baynakum. Subhanallah. And here we're saying, no, this guy's a Sufi, I'm a Salafi, he's a Hanbali, I'm a Shafi'i. We can't unite. It will never work. Allah said in the Quran, upon a common word, not everything. Find a common denominator and unite upon that. Ibn Taymiyyah in his latter years, he would say, so long as somebody makes wudu properly and faces Qibla, Ahlul Qibla, I consider him Muslim. You essentialize at the end, you realize actually, there's more strength in unity than there is in dividing the ummah. And right now, more than ever, we need this unity. I don't think we're going to unite based on Aqidah in every point, because we haven't done that for the last 1400 years for the most part. We're not going to start doing it today. But we have sufficient unification or unifiers that would help us do that. You know, we pray 5 times a day. We face the same Qibla. We fast in Ramadan 30 days, all of us, the majority of us in the Muslim world. We celebrate Hajj in the same place at the same time of the year. We have so many things that unite us as an ummah globally. When there is a Hajj, let me ask you this, somebody says to you, you can never unite with Shia. I'm not saying we have to unite with Shia on everything, but I'm going to say this to you. If that theory was correct, Allah would not have enjoined upon all of us to fast Ramadan in the same month. Why don't we disagree to fast in the same month as the Shia? When it came for Hajj, why doesn't Allah say some people pray Hajj, make Hajj in this month and others the following month? We all come to the same place at the same time and we worship Allah and we make Hajj in the same place at the same time. There's no way outside of that. There's no way outside of that. Whether we like it or not, we have to make Hajj at the same place and the same time, and that's a sign of unification. Whether we like it or not, you can't say, for example, I'm not going to go to Hajj this year because this group is going to be there. You have to make Hajj. Allah has enjoined it upon you. And the vision, just seeing the Muslims together, 3-4 million together, is a powerful reminder of what we're capable of doing if we decide to strategically unify upon certain points. That's all it is. I'm not saying that we should apply everything. Let's all be aligned on everything. But let's not be silly and naive in thinking that until everything is perfect, we can't have any unification, because that's how we end up becoming where we are today, divided, weak, and in endless cycles of just division. We divide ourselves more than anything else. Brother Faiz, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was interrupting you. Sorry for that. But mashallah, great point, because if anybody has gone to Umrah or Hajj, you can imagine that in Ihram, you never realize that whether the person next to you is a Shia or a Sufi, or whatever it is. Yeah. No, we don't do that in Mecca in front of Kaaba. So we have a spiritual center, and a political center is as much necessary as a spiritual center. That's what the point I'm trying to make.
Absolutely. And in fact, by the way, in every school of thought, pretty much, there will be a chapter in fiqh. When you make Hajj, do you pray behind the Imam? If that Imam is Salafi or Wahhabi, and you made Hajj from the subcontinent, is your prayer valid behind that Imam? Every school has that. The Shia have that as well. If you go, because there's only one Imam. There's not going to be 4 Imams for you to pick the one who's agreeing. Or it's only going to be one Imam. Arafah is only one day.
Only one day.
Yeah, so you have to, at that point, you have no choice but to unify with the rest of the Muslim Ummah. Allah did not give us a choice in that. Same with Ramadan. That month of Ramadan, all the Muslims have to. And these are really examples for us to think about the potential, what we can achieve. And we're not going to agree on everything. We're not going to agree on everything, but the potential is there if we want to develop that potential. Yeah.
Even if we analyze the past history of 100 years, if we see that even at the lowest ebb of the Uthmani Khilafah, they had kept a cap on problems like the Palestine, Yemen, or Uyghur, or Rohingya, or Bosnia, whatever you can imagine, even at their lowest point of time.
Subhanallah. That's such a wonderful statement, because again, some of the greatest, some of the worst ordeals, genocidal ordeals against Muslims, as you said, wasn't possible when the Ottomans were there.
Yeah.
In the Balkans, Bosnia, and now what we're seeing in Palestine, that wasn't possible. There was oppression, there was neglect, no denying that, but they were a shield for the Muslims at that time.
Yes, and you know, we are at least speaking for the Palestinians, but who is speaking for the Uyghurs? Who is speaking for the Rohingya?
Who will speak up for them? There's no unified, there's no direction for us to complain to. We're going to the UN, we're going to BRICS, we're going to ICJ, we're going to...
And a population as much as size of the whole country of Pakistan, that much population in India, the Muslims, they've got lost.
There is no head in terms of if there were to be a war.
There's no head. They're not visible at all.
If there were to be a war in India today, may Allah never make that happen. The Muslims who live in India, do you feel that you have sufficient security as a segment of a larger population to have the autonomy to decide where the war should go, where not to go, whether you join the army or not? If there were to be a war in India, the Muslims there may not have even 50% of the opportunity to decide what to do in the war. Yeah. So we've lost the unity. We've lost the unity.
Yeah, there's no unity, there's no opportunity, because I come from a place called Hyderabad, and we have practical experience where, we gave our blood to establish Pakistan, but when we needed it the most in 1948, nobody helped us.
Subhanallah. Subhanallah.
Yes, and Pakistan even couldn't help their brothers and sisters next door in Kashmir as well. Remember what just happened 4 years ago in Jammu and Kashmir? The Indian government, the fascist government of Modi just enacted the region of Jammu and Kashmir, and Pakistan did nothing. And there have been just recently, 20 years ago in 1999, the Kargil, the war where Pakistan even betrayed the cause of the Mujahideen in Kashmir. So Pakistan, as a big nation in that region with nuclear power, is not even able to help their brothers, their very brothers and sisters in Kashmir, let alone in Ost-Turkestan, or like in East Turkestan, or in Palestine, or in Myanmar, and so on. That's really sad. Really sad to see that, even though I'm not from Pakistan, but that's also part of Muslim territory, part of Muslim land, isn't it?
Yeah, at least for Kashmir, they are paying the lip service. For Uyghurs, there's no lip service also.
Subhanallah.
I remember
China has a hegemony
interview.
over the Muslim world.
Sorry, guys, there are many hands
I'm
up
sorry.
here. Just speak, please. Don't just speak. When you have just speak. Don't wait for
Brother Sufyan, go ahead. You're from the US.
I'm saying that China has too much hegemony over so many countries. So that's why so many leaders just shut up about the Uyghurs, unfortunately. And also, the West is speaking out against the Uyghurs. So unfortunately, a lot of Muslims have suspicious on the Uyghur thing. They're saying like, oh, if the West is talking about it, something must be going on. And also, yes, with the Khilafat, we can protect Muslims around the world in all places. As we saw in Amsterdam last week, we know what happened, and that little state was able to do all this to protect their people. So imagine if the Muslims had a small Khilafah even, we can protect Muslims around the world and prevent genocides. So.
You know, Brother Sufyan, just to contribute to what you just mentioned, the last point is that even if this unity or this entity wouldn't wage war because of what happened in Amsterdam, at least this unity could challenge the Zionist narrative, which was placed in the public media. Yeah, so that's the very least this unity, this state could have done if there was such an entity. So we can't even challenge this. We have to seek and reach out to the Western people, to some journalists, to some like sincere people who would challenge this narrative of the Zionists because of what happened on the streets of Amsterdam.
Yeah,
so we are in
exactly.
a state in which we can't even such a blatant and obvious matter of what happened in Amsterdam recently. We can't even, as Muslim nations, we can't even challenge this. Is that not like that's really sad, to be honest? Like
a little entity with 7 million people is destroying 2 billion people like so easily, just out of this power. And I think we need to utilize.
It's just a coincidence that I'm joining from Amsterdam.
Just brother, just to touch on brother Mr. Emre's points. I'm forgiven, brother, if I pronounce your name incorrectly, brother Mr.
No, it's just my nickname. My name is Emre.
Emre, presumably you're from Turkey, brother Emre is from Turkey.
Yes, originally from Turkey, but I'm living in Germany.
Okay, excellent. No, exactly. Just to add to what you were saying, Brother Emre, just come back to your early point about Pakistan, and I completely concur with what you're saying about Pakistan. So I'm from Pakistan, my ethnicity is Pakistani, and I must say I am really disappointed with the powers that be within Pakistan, because you're absolutely right that Pakistan has one of the largest armies within the Muslim world. Unfortunately, that army hasn't been used for the defense of Kashmir. Nor has it been used for the defense of Palestine. And I think, there's a distinction, a clear difference between what the masses want and what the establishments want in our countries. And this is all by design. And I think this can go for a lot of our Muslim countries, in the sense that the establishment and the governments, they want something else. They want to serve the interests of the West, whereas the Muslim masses, they want something else. And I think what's good to see, alhamdulillah, is that Palestine over the past year, it's been a madrasa. And what I mean by madrasa is that it's taught us Muslims our deen, and it's woken the ummah up as well. And the other positive that we've seen from Palestine as well is that, alhamdulillah, a lot of non-Muslims have reverted back to Islam as well. And the reason why I say this is that I think there's an awakening, and over the past year or so, I think I've seen this shift as well within the ummah, in the sense that there's a lot more unity now, and that unity that we're seeing, within Muslim countries, within Muslims in Europe as well. I believe that unity is based on Islam, and I think we just need to basically work on that unity, to the point that it affects the politics within our countries. And what I mean by that, in terms of it affecting the politics in our country, it needs to affect the political medium, within our countries, and that unity that the Muslims are calling to. We need to ensure that the powers that be in our countries, they're getting that message as well. Because the one hadith comes to mind, which is where the Prophet ﷺ said that if you see an evil, change it with your hand. If you can't speak out against it, and if you can't do that, hate it in your heart, which is the lowest form of iman. Now, the thing is, the powers that be in our countries, in the Muslim countries, and when I say our countries, I'm specifically referring to the Muslim countries. The powers that be, they have the capability of bringing some sort of change, within our countries. And I think, we may be the layman, we may be the layman whereby we can't do anything with our hand, but I believe it's an obligation upon the layman to remind those who have capability and influence. It's an obligation upon us to remind them of their obligation. And again, people may say they may not listen to us, but the thing is, we have the obligation, and as long as we carry out that obligation, then inshallah on Yawm al-Qiyamah, we can say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, Ya Allah, we tried our best. And I think that's the mindset that we need to have. And we need to reach out to the powers that be, so that we can inshallah remind them of their obligations.
I think.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can I add a little?
Yeah,
something?
certainly.
One, I don't see ununity. The unity, a little example of this unity is us today. Turkey, Pakistani, and Egyptian. I don't know what the brother, but like a Somalian, we are all over the place. And we are talking with one tongue, regardless of those small things about Sufis and Shi'is and stuff. Like if we look at Salah ad-Din army, it was gonna be from all fractions. That's not the problem. The problem is we are participating in a system that is done by our occupiers. And they use different tools, from occupying the land to occupying the economy to occupying the minds. And what they fail to infiltrate to the degree that they want it is to infiltrate the minds. Like you see today from all over, and it's not just by Palestine, and Palestine through history been always the ignite or the flame that always get the Muslim back together. Like you saw at the Abbasis and the Umayyads time, there was like two big amazing places that produce like inventions and being a lead into the world without being even united, like the Abbasids and the Umayyads. You saw Muluk Ta'if, for example, in Andalusia, and how they failed Spain, you know, to gain its power back. But at the same time, everything get in this cycle, and I don't want to say it's repeated, but for the most part, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of changing this line and always preserve his deen and his ummah and his language through history. It's just for us to being able to do what we all wanted to do. Literally, it something has to happen when it comes to the fraction between the powers. The Prophet ﷺ and his Sahaba came in a time of fraction of superpower as well. Like the fraction between the force and the room and the ignite between those superpower, the big time civilization. And in the collapse of both of them, this new power came into place and took over with its values, with its, you know, power, with gaining, being tolerance and expanding the meaning of the word ummah. Also, I like the word ummah is not just the Muslim or the born Muslim or the reverts, or no, it expands to the possible ummah. Look at today in what they call the free world, and who's speaking about the Palestinians and the Muslim, and the destruction that happened for the last 20 years of being our faces is being the terrorist, and the destruction that is happening to this narrative through the West, through the places that they thought they have a power over. I'm very, very happy we are, because a lot of the stuff that they invested in for so long to destroy, they are incapable of destroying. Right? I just want to add this little.
That was powerful and very eloquent, honestly. That was a powerful, very eloquent, very eloquent. And you're right. We have a lot of unificating factors. I mean, we are here together, right? And what unites all of us here, aside from the love of literature, perhaps, is that we're Muslims. So just that alone is a massive advantage that we have at our hands. If we want to cultivate it further and develop it and strategize, we could achieve anything we want, bi'idhnillah. We have a vast nation, a vast ummah. And what you said is beautiful. The ummah, the classical understanding of ummah is anyone who comes after, during and after the lifetime of Muhammad ﷺ is the ummah of Muhammad. Yeah. Anyone who comes after that. And then that's categorized into two different categories. Those who have accepted the message and those who haven't accepted the message. But we have a vast opportunity to do amazing things. Do we need to unify in everything? Maybe not. But I think we have a lot of common ground that we can do something with what we have. Because the Soviets had less unification than we have, but they still managed to create the Warsaw Pact. And they managed to take over a vast amount of territory for some time. And they were less unified than we are. So we have a lot of opportunity. But I think we focus more on the differences. We're more focused on dividing and causing division than we are on focusing on, as our wise sister just said here, there's a lot of unificating factors already there. But how do we mobilize that? And perfectly so, I do believe that the Zionist entities worried the resilience of the Muslims, the resistance of the Muslim spirit. We haven't been broken yet. The Palestinians have not been broken. And so that is something that really sends shivers down the spines of the oppressor, to see these people and the wider ummah waking up and seeking solutions. That's something that's tremendous, but maybe we don't see it the way they see it. Maybe we should start seeing it that way. So
they see it because they keep saying Islam is the enemy. Like, if you look at the Muslim ummah everywhere, they've been oppressed, they poor, they like all those things that by their measurements is supposed to be like broken, but it's still the big fear of Islam. Islam is invading the West. Islam is the enemy. Islam is here. We are expanded beyond from from the ocean to the ocean. We are everywhere, from Hawaii to the United States, Australia. We are everywhere, and we change everywhere we are. We change the people around us, the communities around us. And about Palestine today is just clearing the vision, is that it's the war is always between the haqq and the batil. It's just clearing the vision, not more. Now you hear Netanyahu saying Amalek. 20, 30 years ago, there was no mention of religion on TV, or it was the secular, we're supposed to be free and liberal and do all of those, slogans. But now it's clear. America is saying we are with them. They choose according to the crusader mentality. Like, where we at? This is a fath, this is an opening from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to clear the vision for everyone, why we're here and what we are aiming for. And thank you, I'm not gonna
That was excellent. I think we are ready to create a khilafah tomorrow.
Well, I think Sister makes a great point. And if you look at Europe, they are living in the guilty conscience of kicking out the Jews, and the Crusader mentality as well. And as far as the farce of unity is concerned, if somebody is following the European news for the past 2 months, the border controls are back between the Western European nations.
Well, Brexit was it? That was a ticker. Brexit.
Yeah.
That was a ticker. Everything after that is just a slow motion. It's just a matter of time. So the unification isn't really there. As Allah says in the Quran, تحسبهم جميعا وقلوبهم شتى. You think they're united, but their hearts are divided. Yeah. So,
and then one brother made a good point about our obligation to question the status quo. But again, we have ulama between ourselves who say that we cannot even question the rulers of the day.
And these are the challenges that I think if the society demands a change, that change will eventually have to be applied. That unificating, that unified voice has to first of all be mobilized and then eventually directed in the right place. If there is no unification, if there is no commonality, a demand that people are asking for in a common base, then it's difficult to convince anyone to do anything, because you have 3 people asking for 3 different things, for example. But if the unified voice is heard, it's very difficult not to act upon that. We have to start from where we are.
Yeah, I've seen that locally. Like the damage has been done last week when the Maccabi fans ran over Amsterdam, and the mayor blamed the Muslims for that and the Arabs for that, specifically the Moroccans. I know what I'm talking. I'm on the ground. And then the freelance journalists come up, and then channels like Al Jazeera back up. And today the mayor retracted her words. She used the word pogrom against the Jews.
How powerful! Such an evocative word, which actually they invented. We didn't invent the pogrom.
And it made the international damage. The Israeli propaganda machinery used those statements like anything in their favor. And after weeks, she retracted, and nobody knows that.
Subhanallah.
Assalamu alaikum, Ustad.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Shaf.
Assalamu alaikum. So today, excellent discussion today. Just listening to everyone's ideas and participation, I was just going to say, I mean, it seems like what we're talking about in essence might be we probably need a form of ideological unity, a shared vision for the Muslim Ummah as a whole. I mean, as far as I understand, there's actually, Western think tanks. There are think tanks in the US that actually, they state that it should be a policy of Western nations to actually exacerbate the differences amongst Muslims. I think it was at the RAND Corporation or something. It was one of their documents that, working on exacerbating the differences within the Sunni community and even the differences within the Shia and so on. It's actually a stated policy of theirs that, that this is a strategy that they need to follow. And I mean, in terms of unity, it's shared vision, but maybe it's our common values and our social bonds, things like that. These are things that we need to think about. And I'm looking at the suggestions that people had about increasing economic trade and so on. And the reason why I think that that's actually part of the strategy, or that needs to be a part of the plan or the strategy, is that that's actually a tangible mechanism to unite people. If you're trading with your neighbor, you're going to need to keep your relations with them good. And it's a must, basically. And and I think those brothers who talk about economic cooperation, economic unity, and that, they're actually thinking along those tangible lines, basically, in terms of physically, what do we do to keep unity. And then there's more, on the national level and things like that. There's security pacts and security pacts and economic pacts, various other things. So that's just my take on things.
That is true. Allah says in the Quran that when you trade when you have trade relations, mu'amalat, it must be mutually beneficial. Mutual beneficial for both parties. But you're right. If you are investing your neighboring economy, they invest back in you. You have a vested interest in making sure that their economy is stable, because your investments are going to be at jeopardy if they fall into a war, for example. So now you have an incentive to ensure that there is peace in that economy to safeguard your investment there. But also the circulation of wealth. If you maintain it within the region, everybody benefits. Whereas right now, most of that economic investment is going abroad. It's going out of that region, economic region. So there is, of course, certainly, and that's why Islam incentivizes, for example, the zakat is a systematic obligation, circulation of wealth. Okay, so there is a space for it. The only thing I didn't agree with is to make it the standard.
Yes.
When it becomes the standard, we're just basically creating problems now, because there's something greater than just the standard.
But those systems are doing it anyway. Like if you look, you mentioned earlier how the Emiratis is spending in Egypt. Also, if you look at the Saudis are in Egypt, in Algeria, in Libya. So knowingly or unknowingly, they putting their money where it belongs. Once those systems that it's made and designed by the West to oppress you collapse, this money is with the people of the Emirati and with the people of Egypt. And we're gonna integrate that economy. It's always about like cooperation, and instead of like who owns what over who, right? So is it knowingly or unknowingly, we still participated with the IMF. Once this broke, the land is still the land. The people of the land is still on the land. The language, the bridge between them, the Islam before everything is the bridge between them. So it's just a matter of collapsing those systems that tie us up. I don't think the people will mind like having integrated economy anyway.
It may be inevitable, actually, for mere survival reasons. In the same way you have, NAFTA, in the same way you have the European Union, it may just be necessary because it only makes sense, actually, for the greater good of that region to have an integrated economy. But all of that, I mean, the underlying principle in all of this is unification. It's unity, it's coming together.
Ustad, I'm having a difficulty in understanding the degree of unity we're speaking about, because Alhamdulillah, the Ummah is united upon, as you mentioned, Ramadan and Hajj and Salah and all of that stuff. We could be united on that for the next 100 years, 300 years, but the Khilafah is a political entity. It's not an action entity of like ibadah and stuff like that. So as it's a political entity, I don't see this unity of Khilafah ever happening, because the rulers are never going to step down and unite. That's the reality.
That's a good point.
And Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd, like us as people, I can unite with anyone, and we could be united as 2 million people. But as long as Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd have not united and established a political entity of the Khilafah, they can be united on these things for the next 1,000 years, and Khilafah will never be established.
But the question again is, going back to the initial presentation, do we need the Khilafah in that sense of do we need to have that form before we actually see the function come into place? Or as Iqbal said, we can have nations that come together as a league and work together. Yeah?
No, so I would agree with that. I like, if the Khilafah was established right now in the situation the Ummah is, it will be completely useless. They'll have no power because the Ummah doesn't have power. We don't have military strength. We don't have political strength. We have no international strength. So even with the Khilafah, without a strong entity, politically and militarily, it will be useless. If the Khilafah was established tomorrow, yes, we all want it, alhamdulillah, but if it was established tomorrow, it would be destroyed within a couple of days because the kuffar wouldn't, like, they'd be able to destroy it within a few hours.
Let's read what Iqbal says. We've just gone over 2 hours, but I want us to conclude. It's a very, very, very thought-provoking conversation, really. Congratulations. You've really, I'm very impressed, actually. You're very inspired. So what you've just said now is very valid because listen to this. So he's talking about this nation league model, okay, of a living family of republics. So they have their own units, but they're a family of republics. That's why Pakistan is a republic. So the idea that we don't have to have necessarily a uniform government under one ruler, which he compares to imperialism, but we can have republics. We have 51 Muslim nations today, but a living family. There's a bond amongst all of them. That's la ilaha illallah. So he then goes on to say, establishing Muslim unity from the ground up. This league will no longer require any symbolic overlordship, such as the Khilafah. That's a very profound statement. Yeah. If somehow, we're not saying that, as Ibn Khaldun says very clearly, do not dismiss the idea of the Khilafah. Don't work against it. But at the same time, don't be so idealistic to think that you can recreate the Khilafah Rashida. Work from where you are right now. In his day and age, it was kingdoms and imarats and imamates and sultanates. Today we have republics and nations and kingdoms. Iqbal is saying we can create something from the ground up. So where we are, all of us where we are, our societies, our nations, there can be a form of unification as a league, but there isn't a symbolic overlordship, such as the Khilafah, whose location would inevitably favor a particular city or region, and therefore serve only to divide its members, subhanAllah. As a brother said earlier on, when the Gulf nations came together, they had a division in terms of where should the bank be, in Riyadh, or should it be in Doha, or should it be in Abu Dhabi? So this unification, according to Iqbal, these are not my words, it will require a capital. And now where does capital sit? It's division again. We're going to have division, just deciding on where the capital should sit. So far from serving any useful purpose. In other words, this ideal will not serve a useful purpose. I know I'm triggering some people here. Please be patient with me. So he concludes, it has really stood in the way of a reunion of independent Muslim states. All these ruptures in Islam for the sake of a mere symbol of power, which departed a long time ago, subhanAllah. I'm going to leave you with that bombshell. And if you want to read, you can read the book, The Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, page 125 to 126. This presentation, I'll put it in the group so you can download it and go through it yourselves. But it is a very, very interesting set of ideas, I think, from Iqbal. He did not live to see what would come after his death. So these nation states and how we eventually got to where we are today. So maybe he didn't see the blowback or the eventual result of his ideas, but potentially maybe we didn't do it the right way. Maybe that's the issue. Or maybe it just was never going to be successful. We need to have a central authority. That's a question that we can be here another 10 hours discussing. But I would encourage you all, please, to just, if you can read the article, which I'll put the link in the group, do so. And again, I think the medium Ibn Khaldun presents is a beautiful medium. We cannot recreate the ideal Khilafah. This is something that we cannot recreate. Maybe when the Mahdi arrives. But that does not mean we should work against it either. We should be in between. Realistic, pragmatic. What do we have to work with right now? And how do we work to piece those puzzles together? There's a very famous statement amongst the ulama. ما لا يؤخذ كله لا يترك جله. What cannot be attained in its entirety should not be abandoned in its entirety. Just because you can't do something 100%, it doesn't mean you have to abandon it 100%. When I hear people say, there are no Muslim nations on earth, there are no Muslim rulers on earth, psychologically, that's a way of putting yourself to sleep, because now you can say, because there are no Muslim nations, because there are no Muslim rulers, I don't have any choice to do anything, because what can I do? So you give yourself a very good excuse for doing nothing. But the reality is there are Muslim nations on earth. There are Muslim rulers on earth. Are they the best? No. But you at least have something to begin with. You can start doing something with that material, rather than excusing yourself by saying no Muslim nations and no Muslim rulers. And therefore, what can I do about anything? Yeah. So we should start thinking about that on those principles, inshallah. Any final words? Any final words before we close off today? Any final words?
Yeah, I think the ideal Khilafah we cannot establish, but there's nothing stopping us from having a working model of a Khilafah. We can always work towards that.
Absolutely.
And also, Brother Muawiyah reminded me of Rand Corporation. So according to the definition of Rand Corporation, we are the most dangerous set of Muslims, because for them, the individual praying Muslim, like the socialist Muslims that are there, or those who go to mosque and pray 5 times and do their life, going through their daily life, these two categories are not dangerous for them. But the Muslims who talk about politics and political power falls in the second category of Rand Corporation's categorization. And the topmost, like us, who talk about the Khilafah, are the most dangerous ones.
Because it's unification. I mean, this is the thing.
Yeah.
Malcolm used to say that the oppressor, he doesn't like the religion that causes the sheep to be awakened. The wolf hates a religion that wakes the sheep up. Why? Because clearly he's preying on the sheep. So if you're being awakened to something greater, the potential of what you have, certainly the wolf is going to be wary and unhappy about that. So, barakallahu feekum.
And we have to show how amazing our history is to everyone.
Not just not just our history, our culture, our
culture, ideologies, because like we have somewhat of a conquest mentality right now because of the West. Or we conquer this, but we have to show everyone that, to counter the imperialistic narrative, every single one of us is an indigenous to where we are. We are an indigenous Muslim from India, from Turkey. Sorry, brother Emirate, but you got some Anatolian in you. So we're all indigenous people, and we're not imperialists or conquerors. And that's how Islam flourished. And we were never centralized. We had many dynasties and governments, even in the one Khilafah, which worked for centuries. And these states, they haven't even lasted a century. Like America was nothing before 1950. And we had empires that lasted centuries. So we can easily show people that this system is better than what they have, because they're not that united. We saw in the elections, USA, nobody's united at all. They don't even know what they are.
And for anyone who doubts this, what our brother has just said, wonderful words, actually. Have you realized in the last maybe 3 to 4 years, there is a shift, especially in the Western nations, America, Britain, in the younger generations moving to Muslim countries, for example, the richer Muslim countries, Dubai, Emirates, and these kind of countries, Qatar. There is a shift. There is a psychological shift in how they see the world today. What used to be, I want to go to America, is now I want to go to Dubai. Okay, I know Dubai is not necessarily the most Islamic kind of, you could say, ideal, but it is still Islamic from their perspective. It's a Muslim country, and it is a Muslim country. But the point is, it is possible to persuade people to have a different perspective of the world, the Muslim world. Yeah, we have a lot to offer the world. We have a lot to offer the world. And I think it's just a matter of waking up to that reality. And we already have a lot of unity and unifying factors amongst us. We just have to basically apply ourselves to it. And hopefully, bi'ithnillah, if Allah should decree that we are the generation who actually sparks that change, that would be amazing. Because it's been 100 years, we haven't done it. So we've tried everything, by the way. Anything you can come up with right now, economic, social, nationalistic. We have tried every single model of unification under the sun. There's only one thing we haven't tried yet, and we're a bit reluctant to this very day. But that's the one thing that will guarantee us some form of unity, pan-Islamic unity. And with that, as Ibn Khaldun says, just be pragmatic. Don't be idealistic and don't be pessimistic. Remain in the middle and work with what you have. Begin with where you are. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of anything, you know. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you so much. Really, I appreciate your presence, your patience, your wonderful ideas. You've really cheered my evening up. I was a bit tired after work. But I'm genuinely very, very happy to see that there are Muslims who genuinely engage online and through spaces to learn and to share perspectives. And we don't have to insult one another. We don't have to send each other to hell. We don't have to condemn one another. We're here to genuinely open up ideas and to share ideas. And I think the perspectives that have been shared today, we're all winning because we're all learning something different. Yeah? So please, let's continue this way. Inshallah, we can hopefully make a small difference online. Barakallahu feekum, and inshallah, I'll put everything in the channel, but also in the group. So for those who want to read up later on, you'll be in the group.
Jazakallah khair for creating this platform to begin with.
Oh, well, you created it because, as I said before, I invited people to come and create a community channel. And so you turned up, you're participating, you keep the chats very active. So this is something that is a group effort, and inshallah it continues that way.
Barakallahu feekum.
Barakallahu feekum. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.